Ranked as the 18th most innovative country in the world, Canada has long been a world leader in science, technology, and innovation. With the rise in overall global competition, the question isn't whether Canada is an ideal environment for innovation and entrepreneurship to thrive, but rather,
what's the key driver for innovation? I said it's people.
But with relatively higher salaries and a reportedly better lifestyle across the border, does it make sense for Canada's innovation and tech sector to simply rely on its people? We sat down with the Honourable Navdeep Bains, Canada's ISED Minister, to talk about why Canada has been struggling to be at the forefront of innovation, as well as other aspects of its portfolio.
I would argue it's the best portfolio in government. It was traditionally known as Industry Canada. Okay. And when we formed government in 2015, the Prime Minister gave it a new title and a new mandate. It's now Innovation, Science, and Economic Development. And the idea being is that innovation is the new norm, that we have to constantly challenge the status quo, we have to consistently look at new solutions, we have to embrace technology, not oppose it. And what's really exciting is also the connecting science, because that's part of the innovation ecosystem, and how that all relates to economic development, growth, and jobs. So my primary responsibilities are really overseeing the Canadian economy to make sure that we're competitive, to make sure that we're creating good quality jobs, and that we're positioned in the long term for success. And I'm responsible for many different aspects of the economy, but fundamentally it's really about focusing on people, on education, on lifelong learning, technology adoption, and helping companies grow and scale so we can create more jobs.
In 2016, Canada was ranked as the 15th most innovative country in the world, but in 2017, it dropped down to the 18th most innovative. What kind of challenges and barriers do you think prevent Canada from entering that bracket, that top 10 bracket, which is currently being dominated by Nordic nations?
So we want to be the most innovative country in the world. That is the ambition, that is the vision we have. And you're right, it is a global race. We're competing with other jurisdictions, countries that have focused on innovation in a very strategic way for a very long time. And from our point of view, when we talk about innovation and when we talk about succeeding, we need to have a plan. That's why we introduced the Innovation and Skills Plan. We felt that cuts to science in the past was undermining our ability to innovate. The fact that we didn't have a national IP strategy. If you think of innovation, in a lot of these metrics, they look at IP intensity, intellectual property. Do we generate that? Do we commercialize that? Do we develop jobs? And so there's so many different metrics, so many different ways of measuring innovation. But for us to be able to succeed and to improve our ranking, it fundamentally boils down to having a plan, which we do. It's called the Innovation and Skills Plan. And now it's about executing and implementing that plan. And that's what we're doing. We have had 3 budgets. The first budget was really a focus on artificial intelligence, for example, as an illustration of our innovation plan. Then we focus on coding for young kids. This is very exciting. The next 2 years, 1 million kids will learn how to code. We talked about immigration and using global skills strategy to bring in some of the best and brightest from around the world in areas where we are high in demand, that we need specialized skills. And then how do we help companies scale up? And that's a super cluster initiative, which is really about bringing companies together, having larger companies mentor smaller companies and allow them to scale up as well. And so all these different programs, the implementation of this is going to be critical for us to be able to succeed in this global innovation race. And I'm confident that now that we have a plan, that we're implementing this plan, and it's very comprehensive. It's a multi-year plan. It focuses on science as well. I mentioned that before. We made historic investments in science, over $4 billion in the last budget alone. So we feel now that we have a plan in place, and that will allow us to succeed going forward.
Another key factor to consider in this case is research commercialization. Despite its entrepreneurial and economic growth benefits, research in Canada is not usually commercialized. Are there any plans to change that?
So, we're really, really good when it comes to publications, when it comes to basic science, basic research. I'll give you an example of artificial intelligence. On a per capita basis, we're the best in the world. And generally, when it comes to publications, we're very strong. We represent 0.5% of the world's population and 2% of the publications. So we punch well above our weight when it comes to science. The issue is, as you well articulated, is how do we commercialize that? How do we create jobs? How do we see the benefits here in Canada? And that's why we launched our first national intellectual property strategy just a few months ago. And the idea behind that is to help companies, particularly those companies that are really focused on generating IP, generating ideas, have an IP strategy. And so that they can commercialize that and see the economic benefits. And to give you an idea how far behind we are, take the US for an example. If you take their S&P 500, their stock market, and you look at the top 500 companies, their asset value attributed to intellectual property, the new knowledge economy, intangible assets is 84%. In Canada, if you look at the TSX, the top 30, only 40% of the assets are attributed to intellectual property, for example, or intangible assets. So we need to do a better job of competing in the new knowledge economy. We need to do a better job of commercializing. And as you mentioned, we're really good on the science. We're really good at generating ideas. And that's why we have put forward a national IP strategy to help focus on commercializing those ideas, generating growth and good quality jobs.
So we know why Nordic nations are leaders in innovation, but what's more important to note is that these traits are of significant focus in the region's universities. Do you think that it's high time that our schools, colleges, and universities shifted the focus from a more traditional, in my opinion, an outdated system to a more forward-looking system that really puts an emphasis on the development of skills in areas such as analytics much early on? And what is the government doing in that aspect?
So the curriculum is a great debate. How kids learn, the format, is it conducive to the new work environment? Are kids being taught the soft skills that they need as well as the technical skills that they need to compete for the jobs of tomorrow? And that's the key part, because things are changing so quickly. Jobs that we can't even anticipate 10 years from now, have no idea, will be generated so quickly. And are people equipped for those jobs? Do we have the right skill sets? And that really boils down to how kids are taught. Analytics, you talked about. I briefly mentioned coding before.
Right.
That's why we introduced coding, and not simply for the sake of coding, but to make sure that young people have that digital literacy, that digital knowledge, are comfortable with the concept of coding. And so the idea was we couldn't really embed ourselves in the curriculum because kindergarten to grade 12 is provincial jurisdiction. And so what we did is we gave this money to non-for-profit organizations who then would deliver it to schools. So that way we don't impede on provincial jurisdiction. So we are finding ways to supplement and to support our education system where we think changes need to take place. So your assessment of the fact that there needs to be change in the classroom environment, I believe, is very accurate. And we at the federal level are doing everything we can without getting into some sort of constitutional battle or jurisdictional issue of providing those tools to teachers and to students so they can prepare for the jobs of tomorrow, because things have to change. The economy is changing, jobs are changing, so therefore the way we teach our kids has to also change.
Okay. And do you think that brain drain is increasing in Canada as more and more of our young talent moves to the States for not only better paying jobs, but also, to quote, better lifestyle?
I would say it's a bit of a brain circulation game. I would say if you look at our colleges and university, particularly in the last few years, there's been an enormous spike in light of what's happened in the U.S., in light of what's happened with Brexit. I think I believe, and the data shows, many international students are looking at Canada. So a lot of talent is coming to Canada. And people that are graduating are staying here because a lot of companies are investing here. Some of the large typical players like Amazon and Facebook and Google and GE are making significant investments. But there's also tremendous Canadian companies that are doing well. I was just meeting with Toby from Shopify, who's expanding at such a tremendous rate. And so those good quality jobs exist here in Canada. Great quality of life exists as well. I think what we want to promote is brain circulation. I don't mind if a Canadian goes abroad, gets some more skill sets, and then comes back to Canada. And I think that's what we need to be as a confident nation. We need to say, look, we have some of the best talent in Canada. We are using immigration strategically to attract some of the best talent globally because we don't have a monopoly on good ideas. And we recognize that talent's going to move where the opportunities come. Some might be in Canada, some might be abroad. But we have to continually focus on creating the best possible environment for people to stay in Canada. And so a good quality job is important, but so are smart policies. And I'll illustrate one point. immigration.
Okay.
If we bring someone here and they can then sponsor their husband or wife or sponsor their parents, that makes a big difference because those people want a good quality job, but they also want their family with them as well. That matters to them. And other jurisdictions don't have those kinds of policies in place the way we do. So that is an example of how we can attract some incredibly smart talent, use immigration as a means to keep them here in Canada. Because if their family is here and they've got a good job, they're most likely not going to leave. And for Canadians that are growing up here, we want to make sure there's an incredible ecosystem of Canadian companies, both small and large, where they have those opportunities. And we're starting to see that, particularly in artificial intelligence. It's incredible the amount of opportunities that exist there. But also in regenerative medicine and quantum technology and advanced manufacturing with additive manufacturing. So yes, there's a challenge around brain circulation, but I think we're getting the equation right. I think we're making smart and strategic investments. We're using immigration policy, educational policy, job creation policies to create conditions for people to stay in Canada as well.
I'm going to quote a report that was released. Tech workers in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Seattle earn on average double the rate of their peers here in Toronto. In fact, when you adjust for the cost of living, the salaries across the border are still significantly higher. So what is the government doing to kind of help the Canadian companies and firms to close that pay gap, which is pretty much driving away that talent that we have?
So again, I would say that pay is an important part, but it's not the only part.
Okay.
I think people are looking for fulfillment. People are looking to have an impact on society. They want to make sure they're part of a company that is making positive change. So we're focusing on how do we help companies scale and grow in Canada? How do we create global champions in Canada so we can have some of those senior level positions in Canada? So if those individuals are going to the US for better pay, can we create comparable opportunities in Canada? And then above and beyond that, the quality of life is second to none here. We've got great stable political system, great stable political economy as well. I talked about the importance of immigration. So holistically speaking, I think we're in the right place. We've got a great healthcare system that's the envy of the world, for example. So there's other aspects to decisions that people make, but I think having good companies where people can have an impact makes a big difference, and that's why we're investing so much in our ecosystem. That's why we made investments in superclusters, close to $1 billion. That's why we've invested in the Industrial Research Assistance Program to help companies scale up and grow. That's another $700 million investment. That's why for clean technology, because clean tech is, again, an area where young people especially want to go towards because they see that having an impact on a clean environment. We've invested $3.3 billion on financing clean tech companies. So we think those investments are creating the meaningful employment opportunities that individuals would want and individuals would like in Canada, and we're really excited about that.
Okay, so like you mentioned, the Toronto-Waterloo corridor is obviously thriving in terms of the number of active business startups, and there's been a lot of R&D investment as well.
Yes.
So all in all, it's an ideal community for entrepreneurs. Are we looking to be the next Silicon Valley, or can we be much more than that?
Oh, we can be much more than that in the sense that we got to play to our strengths. Silicon Valley has a different history. It obviously has done tremendously well. It's really the benchmark for success in many ways, not in every way, in many ways. And we have to play to our strengths. That's why we announced, as I mentioned, not only the supercluster announcements, but in those areas we focused on our strengths. So agriculture. There's so much innovation happening in agriculture, especially in protein. So we supported that initiative. In ocean technology out in Atlantic Canada. In artificial intelligence, primarily coming out of the Quebec-Toronto-Waterloo corridor. In digital technology, coming out of British Columbia and using analytics and big data, not only in forestry and precision health and manufacturing, and here in Ontario, additive advanced manufacturing. Okay. So those are the areas we need to play to our strengths. If you look at outside of Silicon Valley, when it comes to life sciences cluster, the Toronto-Waterloo corridor is number 2. So we have a great ecosystem. Let's not try to copy someone. Let's try to create one that's organic, that plays to our strengths, that plays to our tradition in supporting those key areas. And I think that's how we'll succeed going forward.
So obviously there's great potential for that tech hub that you speak of, but in order for that to really be successful, we need some kind of reliable and speedy transportation system. something like a railway system as opposed to just relying on the 401. And I'm sure you're
Oh,
aware of
I've had
that.
nightmares on the 401 where it's a
Exactly.
parking lot, and I sit there and I look around and think to myself, how did I get stuck in this predicament? Infrastructure is so key, and that's why we introduced the infrastructure bank.
Okay.
And the idea behind that is saying, look, as a government, there's some big transformational projects that we need to undertake, and we can't finance them by ourselves. How do we create a public-private partnership to do that? And a corridor linking Waterloo and Toronto through high-speed rail, for example, is an amazing illustration of the kind of transportation investment we need that will help the flow of people, that will further strengthen that cluster, that ecosystem, and make it more and more, the envy of the world.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about innovation. It is predicted that in the next 10 to 20 years, 42% of the Canadian employed labor force is going to be at a high risk of being impacted by emerging technologies like advanced robotics and artificial intelligence. So the question is, should we be worried by this staggering percentage? And what is the government doing to kind of ease that transition to a more digital and a more automated economy?
So it is staggering, and I think those are big numbers, and we as policymakers are very mindful of that. And I feel the anxiety when I'm out there talking to people. They're worried about their own jobs. In my neck of the woods in Mississauga, Malton, there's a big transportation hub. We're near the airport. We're near the major 400 series highways. And, with autonomous vehicles that could potentially and will have a significant impact on a lot of people that drive, for example, and that fit that category that you talked about. So we as a government are focusing a lot on skills and retraining, re-education. We have a program, if you're mid-career and you're 45 years old, we can get you a grant, an interest-free loan, so you can go back to school and get the upgrades and the skill sets that you need. And it doesn't require 15, 20 years in school. In a couple of years, you can get those new skills and have the opportunities in the new economy. For us as a government, we've made the decision. Either we, try to protect the status quo, or we get ahead of the curve.
Okay.
And we want to get ahead of the curve. We know change is coming. We know automation is happening. We know artificial intelligence is going to have an impact. So how do we prepare for those new opportunities? How do we play a leadership role? How do we create good quality jobs? And how do we make sure people are positioned to succeed? And that's really where we're focused on. And so a big part of our agenda is really focused on education, training, retraining, lifelong learning, from coding all the way to people mid-career, even end-of-career, that want to continue to be part of the digital economy.
Okay. So obviously with automation comes a lot of job creation, which is the very nature of that science. However, we can't deny the fact that there is a risk of a significant amount of job loss, especially in occupations that are, I guess you could say, more rudimentary in nature.
Yes.
So what kind of policies or regulatory constraints can Canadians expect from the government that aim to protect human rights?
So when we talk about technology, we talk about innovation, if we don't have people that embrace it, that support it, we're going to lose out. If you don't, we talk about the environment having a social license. The same applies to technology. If companies want to continue to automate, if we want to see new solutions come up, we need to make sure people accept that. So if we look at data, for example, we saw the recent breach with data analytics, in Cambridge Analytics, with Facebook. We've seen Equifax and data breaches there as well. So trust is so important. So that's the key issue. If we want to succeed going forward, we need to build trust when it comes to ethics, human rights, data protection. People need to have confidence that the new technologies aren't going to in any way undermine their ability to succeed in a democratic society. And that's where we as government have to create those policies, have to build that trust, work with private sector, work with civil society to make sure people embrace it, knowing that that there are checks and balances in place, that human rights will be valued, that ethics will be central, that data will be protected. That's very important for us going forward.
Okay, that's awesome. And finally, all things considered, do you think Canada is headed in the right direction? And what can Canadians expect in the coming years?
So our fundamentals are very strong. We have a highly educated population. We have a robust, diverse economy. We have a stable political system. So our fundamentals are really strong. I think we just can't be complacent. I think as Canadians, we need to be ready for major changes in our lives. The speed and scope of technology is incredible. The impact is far-reaching. and we need to be ready for that, and it's going to require a collective effort. Government can't do it alone. We need academia to step up. We need businesses to step up. We need civil society to step up. And I think if we have this multi-stakeholder approach, if everyone works together, the future looks very promising for Canada.
Okay, awesome. I'm sure it will be. Thank you once again for taking the time out.
No problem. Thank you, Dua. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for watching, and let us know whether or not you think Canada is headed in the right direction.